Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Benway. And we're going to be talking today about the films of Quentin Tarantino. Benway, you hate Quentin Tarantino. So why don't you start this episode by saying what an awful man he is and why he should be shot when the revolution comes?
Well, you know, he may get himself shot before that. I wouldn't want to claim credit. But my response to Quentin Tarantino is very interesting, which is to say, when I was young, especially for my group, I'm a millennial guy. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're forgiven. And what?
And so, you know, when we were getting into movies and everything, the hottest shit guy everybody always had was, Quentin Tarantino is the best filmmaker because he does all these wild, violent movies, but he has the great dialogue and all of this shit. And so, you know, obviously Pulp Fiction was when we were little kids. I wasn't even 10 years old when it came out, but it was long in our memory. And then when we were getting into high school, the Kill Bill movies were out and people really loved that shit. But when it was getting around like the end of Kill Bill into Inglourious Bastards territory, I'm just watching this shit and I'm saying, you know, I just despise this in a way. It's like it felt like, so Quentin Tarantino described his response to Godard, which to me felt like exactly my response to him, Quentin Tarantino, which was, you know, Godard is kind of like a guy you admire when you're young and you're trying to learn your own thing, so you try to copy him and eventually you just outgrow him.
Yeah.
That's my attitude to Quentin Tarantino. I completely outgrew this guy. And when I paid more attention to, you know, what good writing actually entails, and I'm looking at Quentin Tarantino's dialogue, people always described it as smart. I think it's smart ass, not smart.
I agree.
And it's like calls attention to itself, and it's not that compelling. And if you really dig into what he's saying, it's actually not that intelligent.
Yeah.
And and this was also at a time that I was really appreciating the writing of David Mamet, which is, okay, that's writing that's bringing attention to itself, but it's actually intelligent and it's actually doing something very interesing.
Well, early
so
Mamet. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, what happened to me, I completely agree with your analysis in the sense that when Tarantino, for me, he was a contemporary. See, I was 24 when Reservoir Dogs came out. And as the movie comes out, everybody is going to see it. Now, I was in college at the time. And it came to our college, not to the local art house cinema, but to the actual college. And it played in the college theater. And I remember very well going to see it. And I remember thinking, I was under the impression that Tarantino was like this new talent who had come out of theater. That was the impression I got. And if you look at Reservoir Dogs, that actually makes a lot of sense because Reservoir Dogs is extremely theatrical. Theatrical, not in a movie sense, but in a theater sense, in a staged sense. There is a vibe that everything that's going on in the meetup point could have taken place on a stage. I mean, you could easily see Reservoir Dogs being turned into a stage play. I don't think that anybody would be very surprised if somebody at some point decides to do just that. I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened. But anyway, I saw the picture when it came out. I saw it with a buddy of mine who is a Croatian guy. He was big into running and math and philosophy. And he was he had dropped a tab of acid to watch Reservoir Dogs, you know, and that was quite the trip, you know. But anyway, the point is, I watched that picture and I thought it was terrific. I thought it was incredibly exciting. I was very overwhelmed by the flexibility in terms of time, in terms of flashbacks, flash forwards. I just thought it was a really clever script in that regard. And I really liked it very much. And then when Pulp Fiction came out, well, that was a big picture, but between Reservoir Dogs, that was 92, and then you had True Romance, which was the Tony Scott picture with an all-star cast, which surprisingly did not do very well at the box office. It was with Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette, and Brad Pitt had a minor role, and Gary Oldman, Dennis Hopper, what's his name, Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken, by the way, he'd become like a stock character in Tarantino movies for some reason. But anyway, there was this vibe that Tarantino was on his way. He had written True Romance with his partner, Roger Avery. Then he did Pulp Fiction. And at the same year, Natural Born Killers came out. And it was like the Tarantino era. And it happened to me right when I was in college. And those pictures were really influential at the time. They really overwhelmed you. Now, Natural Born Killers, we talked about it the other time with Oliver Stone. You know, that I think it's a breakthrough film in terms of film technique. It's the first and so far only film that has really understood MTV and integrated it completely, impressionistically, in a way that makes sense, right? And it's a pinnacle of Robert Richardson's career as a cinematographer, I think. And then you had what you call it, Pulp Fiction, and that was just. I mean, everybody was talking about it. It was on Time magazine. Time magazine was quoting lines from the dialogue. He just exploded like a supernova, and it's really amazing that he's still around because I think that most people would have been so discombobulated by that whole attention at the time that they would have been thrown for a loop. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
It was so over the top. It was really, I mean, it was the big touchstone. Like I remember even like The Simpsons had a reference, like when they did like the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, guest director Quentin Tarantino,
yeah,
and it's basically Itchy and Scratchy are redoing the ear cutting scene from Reservoir Dogs, and it's like just so utterly ridiculous. But this was like the hottest shit, and I remember people freaking out, say like, "Oh my god, it's the best picture ever made," and all of these amazing things. And I look back at it, and there are scenes I love, right? There are performances I love. As a cohesive story, there's nothing to it. Really, it's
which
just
one? Which one?
Pulp Fiction. There's just set pieces in my mind.
Well, okay. Um, I'm not so sure about that. Um,
Let me put any kind of cohesive, like this says something, is to me it just feels like smoke and mirrors. There's like a lot of good things, like I said, a lot of good things in it. I appreciate playing around with interconnecting stories in time, but they're just interconnected independent stories. I certainly like John Travolta in the movie, who gives like a very interesting and amazing performance. And to give Quentin Tarantino credit, he pulled John Travolta back from like the depths of irrelevance
yeah,
back into the culture, and he's done that several times, which I think more than even his movies, I think are the best thing he's done
yeah.
to do that. But by and large, like a lot of his movies leave me kind of like, okay, I see the talent here, but mostly cold. There's only two movies I think are successful from my mind and just getting everything done well, and I think are just solid movies. That's Jackie Brown and what's that? The Grindhouse one he did,
Death Proof.
Death Proof, because Death Proof's just as silly. Like, hey, it's like a Grindhouse movie. It completely succeeds on those terms.
Well, I think that
Everything
Death
else,
Proof is trivial, but I do think that Jackie Brown is the great picture that he made. I would agree that Pulp Fiction is flashier, and there's a certain energy to Reservoir Dogs, but Jackie Brown has this calmness, this consistency, this just like I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to tell this story that is not particularly profound, but it's interesting and has interesting characters, and I'm going to give them a lot of space and a lot of breathing room to just be characters. And that's why I think that Jackie Brown is the best movie that he ever did. Um,
mm-hmm.
it's technically in terms of filmmaking, it's as good as anything he did. Even though everybody talks about Kill Bill, but Kill Bill one and two, they were just really flashy, but they were ultimately empty. I thought that those pictures were really empty. Pulp Fiction, I saw it more like just a series of short stories with really like Los Angeles as a backdrop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my biggest issue also with Kill Bill, you kind of mentioned it, like Kill Bill to me felt like, let me reproduce these bits of Japanese movies
Yeah.
or other revenge movies that did it better, but I'm just going to have my summary view. Like, give credit where, I mean, he gives credit where credit's due, but I mean, that's other people made that movie before,
Yeah.
and he's just showing me the videotape highlights.
Well, it's that collage mentality is very much, collage, i.e., samples, very hip hop, very pomo, very of the times, of just taking already manufactured material and collaging it and bringing it together, sampling it, and making something new out of it, which is interesting. I mean, because like everything about Kill Bill was used in some other picture. Everything, every shot, every character, every costume design, everything has a source elsewhere. But I think it's precisely that collage approach to it, which is intellectually very stimulating in the sense of like, oh yeah, you're touching on all these different films, all these old films. But at the same time, it's precisely that makes it kind of hollow. I mean, because there's nothing there. It's just like
Right.
you just took a blender and blended all these movies together, and you picked each individual element very well, very tastefully. You quote unquote curated, a word I fucking hate. You curated the material very well, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no synergy.
I agree.
Yeah.
And you're left alone after watching that movie. You say these were great looking fight scenes, and hey, the bride was badass. But I'm like, if that's it, I mean, that's I just saw like a. I could just as easily have gotten that feeling from like a Marvel movie. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, not as artistically made in terms of the visual and narrative, not narrative, but the storytelling elements. But ultimately, like you said, it's slight, and I feel like a lot of his movies ultimately come across as slight.
Yeah. The more you watch his movies, the less there's there. You know,
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, and I'll give you like an example of, and this starts getting into the dialogue issue. There's a line that I think everybody loves to say is greatly profound from Kill Bill Volume 2, and it's at the end where Bill tries to make a point using pop culture reference about the nature of the bride. He says, "Oh, my favorite hero," they're talking about super comic book heroes. He says, "My favorite comic book hero was Superman because for everybody else, their superhero costume was their fake identity, and they were just normal people. But Superman, he was really Superman, but Clark Kent was his costume." I mean, it takes only 2 minutes of reading the other comics to know that's a really superficial reading of all of the characters. Not, I mean, I'll just throw Batman into the way to say how fuck up that is, how superficial reading that would be. But the thing is, leave that all aside. It's like all I'm going to do is take a trite reading of comic books to make a trite point about a trite character. And then suddenly, because I phrased it in such a way that you think is compelling, and I referenced a comic book you read as a kid that you love, suddenly you think I'm smart and profound. That's an exemplar of why I kind of hate his dialogue.
well, okay, I see your point. I see your point, but I don't totally agree with it because in that particular case, okay, sure, we can get to it. Although I think that it is an interesting point that he's raising. But okay, be that as it may, you don't find it interesting or you find it banal or whatever, that's fine. There are other lines of dialogue or other dialogue sequences that are really, really quite brilliant. I mean, for example, I always think of the breakfast scene in Jackie Brown between Jackie Brown and the bail bondsman. His name slips my mind right now. The character played by Robert Forster. It's such a brilliant scene. All right, it's such a brilliant, easygoing dialogue. And one of the things that he has going for him, Tarantino, as a writer, is that he is exceptionally good at naturalistic dialogue and of placing characters, or how can I put it, using pop culture and ephemera and trivia to expand our appreciation of characters that would be otherwise stereotypical. And he showed that to greatest effect of all in Reservoir Dogs. Because in Reservoir Dogs, there's this scene where four of the criminals are driving in a car and they're going somewhere. It's never explained, it's not important. And they're talking about some TV show that they all watched in the 70s. And they all laugh about some character. He says, one of they were saying that in the TV show, the character in the TV show says, "You're under arrest, sugar." It was about some black policewoman, right? And the four characters, they all remember the line, they all say it at the same time, and they're all laughing. They're all criminals, but the way the scene is structured, all of a sudden you see that there's more to them. There's more life to them than just their criminality. And that's the thing that I thought that Tarantino was so good at, of referencing random things that gave his characters more depth. I think that then he started using that as a cliche because I think that what happened to him originally is that he wasn't thinking of it in terms of intellectuality. He just wanted his characters to talk about this shit. He wasn't thinking that this expanded his characters. And
Well,
that's the thing about Tarantino is that ultimately he is a film encyclopedia, but he is not somebody who thinks about his art, which is actually kind of surprising because he knows all these movies, but he doesn't think about the art that he's carrying out. You know what I mean?
well, here's the thing about that dialogue. I actually don't think, outside of a few instances, that Tarantino actually writes naturalistic dialogue. I think he writes exaggerated dialogue that has a false sense of naturalism. In fact, Mamet does something similar, but he does it better. And the dialogue is very heightened. Nobody really talks that way, especially if you think about any time Samuel L. Jackson talks in Pulp Fiction. It's always over the top. He says like, the wallet that says "badass motherfucker," and he has that speech in the coffee shop about the shepherd and everything, and then or whenever time he uses it, it's just completely over the top for the sake of saying, "Oh, look at this cool thing I wrote." And even in Reservoir Dogs, it opens up with the Madonna's song, "Like a Virgin," is about getting fucked by a big dick. I mean, that's that's a little bit over the top. I do find it funny. I mean, I think Jackie Brown has the most naturalistic lines because I never in watching Jackie Brown feel like Quentin Tarantino had the point where it says, "Hey, everybody, shut up! This is my big speech scene." You know what I mean? It all felt just it was appropriate for the story. Every other movie kind of has that moment where okay, Quentin Tarantino wants us to shut up and listen to this latest thing he wrote, so let's do so. And that that's bothersome, to me because it doesn't really service anything other than Quentin Tarantino wants to show off, almost like open mic night at the fucking coffee shop where we're going to talk about our our beat poetry kind of thing. That's the impression I often get in listening to that dialogue.
Well, you know what's interesting about setting aside for the moment the dialogue. I'd like to get back to it in a little bit, but I wanted to point out something that I've thought a lot about insofar as Tarantino's career is concerned. There's this vibe I get that he did Jackie Brown, which is not that commercially successful. It did all right. It was a fairly cheap picture to make, right? And I'm sure that the terms he got to make it were very advantageous. So everybody must have made a profit. And I'm sure that he didn't have to pay much for his actors. I mean, he was so hot that I think all the actors wanted to work with him, right?
Right.
But the thing is, see, the feeling I get is that he did Jackie Brown. And then there was sort of like a pause. He waited like several years before doing Jackie Brown. Jackie Brown was originally supposed to be one movie, and he turned it into two because he had enough material film that he could easily just split it in half. And that's what
Kill Bill broke into two, not Jackie Brown.
I'm sorry, I meant Kill Bill. And so, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I get the sense that he, at some point in that lapse, that period of time between Jackie Brown and going forward with Kill Bill, he must have been deciding what kind of filmmaker he wanted to be, whether he wanted to make a lot of money and have big splashy films that made lots of money, lots of cash, and that were perhaps not very interesting, or if he was going to make more interesting pictures that were smaller, like Jackie Brown. Because Jackie Brown has some of the most extraordinary sequences that I can think of in his career. I really think it's a high point. For instance, there's the unbelievably good conversation between Samuel Jackson's character and I want to say Chris Rock, but not Chris Rock, the other guy, Chris Tucker.
Yeah.
Samuel Jackson goes to visit Chris Tucker at where he lives, at his apartment complex. And it is a single shot, a single take of this long conversation between the two, where Samuel Jackson is trying to convince Chris Tucker to go with him because he's supposedly going to do this weapons deal and he needs backup. And, they talk for a good 5 minutes, easy. And it is brilliant conversation. And it is one character trying to convince the other to do something that the other doesn't really feel like doing because it's late, he's tired, he's stoned, he's not up for it, right? And it's really, really fucking brilliant. I mean, the performances are great, the dialogue is great, the casual naturalness of all of the dialogue, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that Jackie Brown has a bunch of scenes like that are really, really strong. And yet,
my favorite. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say my favorite scenes, but you finish your thought.
But the point I'm trying to make is that not so much the scenes of Jackie Brown, but the fact that Kill Bill was such a commercial grab.
Yes.
And every picture he's done has been such a commercial grab, or has been incredibly manipulated. I'm talking about Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained. We'll get to that soon enough. Those two pictures, I think that they were just pandering to a very specific audience, and they were sucking up to that audience. I mean, basically, he broke out the knee pads and gave them fellatio to Jewish people in the Hollywood industry and to black people in the film-going community. I think it was just fellatio on his part, and I think that decision to go on the Kill Bill path as opposed to following the very interesting dynamic that he had found with Jackie Brown, I think that's where he failed as an artist, and that's why I can't take him seriously as an artist. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. But my take on it is, I am convinced though that the Kill Bills, the Death Proofs, the Inglourious Bastards, Django, what have you, those kind of big roadhouse exploitation-ish mixture films.
Yeah,
that's what he always kind of wanted to make. I mean, like I said, if you look at the movies,
I disagree.
Every time I see him express what he's interested in, these were the kinds of movies he wants
No,
to
no, no,
make.
no, 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 no. Actions express priorities. Focus on what he's actually done, as opposed to what he says. Like
What he's actually done is make those movies, though,
no,
so
no, no, no,
it's
no.
in line.
But no. In his early career, look at Reservoir Dogs and look at Jackie Brown. Those are of a piece. It's Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, and then the Jewish picture and the black picture, and that godforsakenly bad Western that I think that was a colossal misfire. I mean, the first true failure in his career. Um, no, I think that Tarantino has. I think he had the chance for greatness and didn't have the balls to go for it. I think that that's bottom line what happened. He didn't have the balls to have a career like Woody Allen's, of small, grinding them out one after the other, and making your singles, your doubles, your triples, and your occasional home run. He didn't have the balls for that career. Instead, he went for the cash grab. The cash grab, and I mean, come on, you see what I'm saying? I mean,
No, I disagree. Though I think this is a guy who was born to be a sellout, and he got what he wanted. And
so you think that he was
so
always a sellout?
I mean, you could see it coming throughout these things. Reservoir Dogs, and Jackie Brown. Jackie Brown, I'll leave to a side. I feel like that's an experiment, but there are the makings of that kind of career even in Reservoir Dogs. And Reservoir Dogs is bound by the limitations of being an independent filmmaker, so he has to work with that. To your point, it feels so theatrical, stagey because he's forced to do so for budgetary reasons, in part. Not to say it doesn't create a compelling story. It's just part of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
restrictions.
yeah.
Right. But I see especially like you said, in Pulp Fiction, I see the makings of all this shit coming out. And Jackie Brown was a wonderful experiment. I would have loved for him to do more. I just feel like he probably, like I said, especially after Kill Bill, he could have made another kind of Jackie Brown movie, but I don't think he wanted to, and he obviously didn't. He just kept going with it. And like I think you bring up a good point. Whether he's catering to a particular audience and, like you said, performing fellatio or not, he really loves these fucking revenge films and really playing up that game. And so, Inglourious Basterds in particular seems like, I'd hate to use the word offensive because it's not really offensive to me, but it is like an insulting jerk off session to say, like, it's basically, let's gather around and say, it's like the black guy. Django Unchained and Inglourious Basterds are a manifestation of guys who weren't there at the time saying, well, I would have never been a slave, I'd have fought, or I would have never let the Germans kill me, I'd have fought.
Yeah.
And then let's play that fantasy out. They're stupid.
Yeah, they're stupid, and also to me, there is this clear, calculated vibe that he wants to appeal to certain audiences. Inglorious Bastard is aimed at the Hollywood industry, which is predominantly Jewish. And the fact is, there is that vibe that he is doing the picture to curry favor with industry people. I find it creepy. I find it really just disturbing. Okay, and I feel as if everybody working in that picture who was not Jewish is basically catering to that demographic within the film industry. I find it creepy as fuck. I really find it a creepy movie, extremely distasteful.
Well, I'll tell you the scene in particular that I said, like, this is okay. We're not even hiding the fact anymore. It's the very ending when you've got the couple of guys just literally pumping as many bullets into Hitler and Goebbels as they can.
Yeah.
And they're all buffed and everything. They look like Duke Nukem on those video games. And I'm just like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm a fucking Polak. I'm born to hate Germans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even I'm like, this is disgusting.
Yeah. 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 It just like revenge porn.
It's porn. It really is porn.
Revenge porn for the Jews, and then revenge porn for the blacks in Django Unchained. Not to mention that along the way, there are great sequences and scenes and performances. Okay, there are, because the guy is talented. Okay, you cannot, it'd be idiotic to deny that. The guy is incredibly talented. Like the great scenes in Inglourious Basterds, to me, is really the opening sequence with Hans Landa. And in Django Unchained, although it's a little overlong, it's the long the long diatribe that Leo DiCaprio does at the dinner table. It's really great, but like so much of the movie of Django Unchained, for instance, was designed specifically to sort of like egg on blacks, so that the black people, so that they would like yell out and whoop at the screen at the end as Django just blows everybody away, and then hops on the white horse and twirls around and picks up the woman and rides off into the sunset. It was just
Yeah, and this is why I say like Quentin Tarantino's born to do this, because he fundamentally, in my mind, is a slave to the genre of filmmaking. He
mhm.
really loves it, and he knows that I have to deliver. It's in exploitation movies. I literally have to deliver X, Y, and Z. People do have to holler and hoot at the screen because that's I'm supposed to do here, and he delivers on that front. All of the movies, from Death Proof through Inglorious Bastards, Django Unchained, Hateful Eight, we'll leave it aside for a moment. Those three movies completely hit the
Yeah,
mark on
yeah.
what they're supposed to deliver from
Death
a
Proof
genre
is
perspective.
like, yeah, women. It's a women's women are badasses and they kill Kurt Russell in the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I
But his artistry, to your point, his artistry does break through in moments, but it's so contained. Like in Death Proof, I love when, even though it's over the top, I love when Kurt Russell is saying, it does like, "You're going in the book" kind of thing. I put this guy in my book. I love Kurt Russell, but that's
yeah,
besides the point. He has those moments, like you said, in Inglorious Bastards. It's the opening. It's also the scene with Fassbender and the Germans and what fingers you hold up and
yeah,
what they can tell and not. Django Unchained, yeah, the scene you said, he has enough talent and capability to where it does bubble up. You can't help but have those moments bubble up. But he's just so constrained by the desire to deliver on this front that, even though I'm a guy who does not like to knock genre pictures because I think they can produce some things that are very brilliant,
hmm
but he's almost a poster child of the critique of genre pictures, which is to say, when you really buy into it so much, you're not even really creatively doing anything because you're following the formula so much that it writes itself for you. It directs itself for you. And
yeah,
he adds in that, like you said, the really disgusting exploitative elements is like just saying, "Oh yeah, your fantasies about like how you would have done something and you would have changed history. Yeah, I'm just going to give it to you."
yeah, yeah. The other thing is that there's not a single thought that goes through his empty head. I mean, not a single coherent thought about anything other than movies, other than movie technique, by the way, not movie as an art form. He doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He doesn't have any ideas about anything, which I find deeply disturbing. Uh,
This is actually a good point you're making because I actually think that's representative of a lot of the filmmaking we have now. A lot of the filmmaking we have now feels to me like it's the generation that was brought up on film to the point where everything they reference about
yeah, as other films.
anything is just other films. They don't reference life as such. And I'm a guy who really loves movies all the time, but still, I know there are other things to it. But I think J.J. Abrams, for example, is very of the Quentin Tarantino mindset. Like everything he did with Star Wars is a regurgitation of his favorite Star Wars moments. But worse, even worse, that generation or this recent crop of filmmakers is the generation of films on DVD, which is to say, I don't even have to operate on the tempo of a film arc where I have to sit through the whole thing and there's a natural tempo that's slower and methodical you have to build up. I'm the generation of I fast forward just to the bits I like. And so as a story goes the fuck out the window, I'll give Quentin Tarantino this. He'll at least come up with the story that will take you from beginning to end in a way that makes sense.
Yeah,
But the generation that follows him, it's like it's the VCR version of that, or like I said, the DVD version. It's just fast forward to all the best scenes I want, and that's like a deterioration, which I think, frankly, he helps foster.
no, I think it would have happened anyway. Um,
Fair enough, but I think he played his role.
yeah, but I look. He's of the generation of the VCR generation, like Paul Thomas Anderson, people who saw boatloads of pictures that were available on VHS, right? Um, how can I put this? The DVD generation of just skipping to the good parts rather, and just stringing them along, stringing like a bunch of good parts together. Well, look, there's that famous line or saying that a good film is 12 good scenes and no bad ones, or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's very true, but there's a repetitiveness and a lack of thought about people. I think that that's the thing that bothers me the most. There's a lack of thought of about people, and all the people and all the characters that are created by like somebody like what's his face, J.J. Abrams. They're like advertisers' versions of people. They're not real people. They're not real characters.
Right.
Tarantino does have real characters. I mean, you got to give
Yes,
him
he
credit.
does.
The characters that he creates, they're real, and you can feel that they would exist in real life. Not in all of his pictures, not all of the characters. I mean, in some of the pictures, all of the people there could have been real people. All the characters, rather, could have been real people. Like, for instance, Jackie Brown, or
Well,
even
everything in the first three movies, I'd say,
yeah,
those are all real people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a sense that every single one of those people could have existed in the real world. There is even the sense in the Kill Bill movies, because Tarantino says that it's a movie. Kill Bill is like a movie that the characters in Pulp Fiction would have gone to see, which is kind
Right.
of very
I think that's
meta.
astute. Yeah, that's an astute observation. I think he's right.
Yeah. That actually kind of makes sense. But even in Pulp Fiction, I mean, Kill Bill, there are all the characters are interesting. All the characters have something going for them. They're not boring. But then in the revenge pictures, the Grindhouse one, what was it called? Death Proof
Yeah,
and
Death Proof. Yeah.
Inglorious Bastards and Django Unchained. The characters become nothing. They become a lot of the characters, not all of them, but a lot of the characters become just perfunctory. And then in Hateful Eight, man, that was a fucking disaster. I thought that was the biggest piece of shit ever.
My friend and I, who we trade notes on movies all the time, we took a while to finally see that, and then we watched it independently, but at the same time, and we both simultaneously wrote to each other, "It's like, this is kind of shitty, isn't it?" It's like, yeah, it really is.
Yeah. I mean, I was really surprised because they kept going on and on and on that they were using 65 millimeter stock and the whole thing, and they dug
Yeah,
up
yeah.
these old lenses, blah blah. Fuck these the fucking people. Robert Richardson and Tarantino clearly do not understand how to use 70 millimeter. They do not. I mean, it was shocking. They used it for the wrong things. You know, I mean, man, it was just a stupid story. It just didn't make any sense. It didn't make any logical sense.
Well, what was interesting is people were trying to tell me like, "Oh, you love The Thing, so you'll watch this." I'm like, "Why?" And then I'm going through it. I'm like, "Oh God, why?"
Yeah.
you know,
I mean,
it's yeah.
no, there was nothing in it that I thought this is really good. Nothing in it. Look, like at the opening, a lot of people were saying, well, it's got this 3 minute opening shot that's so boring, blah blah. I didn't mind that. I
The
don't have a
slow shots don't bother me.
no, yeah, that doesn't bother me. A
Yeah.
lot of people were like pissed off that in the Force Awakens, that the initial part of the movie was like this desolate young girl in this desolate planet. I thought that was the best part of the movie, quite frankly. The
Hmm.
most interesting because it was slow and evocative, and it let you sort of like get a sense of how lonely this person was. I thought that was interesting, and the rest of it was shit. But the point I'm trying to make, I don't have a problem with something being slow. I have a problem with something being boring and stupid. And this movie was boring and stupid. It was really
Yeah.
stupid. And the characters made decisions that didn't make any fucking sense. They were just flat out absurd.
Well,
And
I'll tell you what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Just that. It's sort of like, you saved me.
Well, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Going into that, I and leaving it, I came to the conclusion like Quentin Tarantino wanted to have this great, almost like that 60s and early 70s, but mostly like late 60s, like great roadshow epic movies of like, the six, like you said, the 65 millimeter, it's all in widescreen. We're going to go around with the highest quality, this, that, and the other. He had all of the technical pieces for it. He set the stage for it, but the heart and soul of what's going to make that successful was completely absent. And I felt like this was a movie, and a lot of his other movies, where I said like the whole genre thing, it was a focus on everything but the whole point, like getting the stage set for everything, and then forgetting the fact that, oh shit, I didn't write this,
The
I didn't
script.
write a story for the point of all of this, and that's what that movie felt like
Yeah,
to
I
me. Like that
agree.
was all missing.
And the weird thing is that Tarantino's always been exceptionally good at having a clear driving point to his stories. I mean, every single picture he's done before Hateful Eight, there is a clear and compelling story. It might be fairly intricate, or it might be split up, like in Pulp Fiction, it was 3 stories basically. But it's clear and compelling. You know what the objective is. There's a clarity to it. Even as
Yeah.
something convoluted as Jackie Brown, which looking at it, it almost looks like a soggy mess, but it's not. It's very clear what it's about. And it has a very strong and clear through line. It's a middle-aged woman realizing that she's suddenly has run out of options. She can't have a kid. Uh, she's going to age, and she better get her shit together. And she's got one shot at scamming this rather nasty piece of work, and she's going to take it, which is
Yeah,
a compelling story. It's a very compelling story, and it's very interesting in how it's handled.
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just extraordinary. It's an extraordinary picture. Kill Bill, same thing. The name itself, the title tells you what it's about. It's about a woman who wants to kill Bill. It's simple, right? Death Proof, same. Django Unchained, like all good exploitation pictures, it's a clear through line as to what it's about. But this picture, it made no fucking sense, you know?
Well, it was unfortunate to the fact that you had it wound up being a movie where we had to see Kurt Russell and Bruce Dern not get a chance to be their crazy, wild, interesting selves.
Yeah.
Because I always love seeing those guys, and this was such a missed opportunity for both of them, especially Bruce Dern. It's like Bruce has only so many up bats left in the career,
Yeah.
so I want to make them count.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I was I was incredibly disappointed. I thought that his cinematography was shit. I mean, because it was just dull interiors in a transparently fake set that was just too large, that it was clear that it was that size in order to accommodate the size of the camera equipment. It was just a bad movie. I don't think that there's
Yeah.
any, and I was really surprised. This was the first time I thought to myself, this is a bad Tarantino. Because even the ones I didn't care for, I did not care for Death Proof. I thought that was a stupid picture. And it was an inconsequential picture. Because another inconsequential picture he did was the one he did in Four Rooms, right? That anthology picture. In that one, he did the thing about the chopping the finger. You know, we were talking about that story about the Roald Dahl picture
Yeah.
story about the guy who bets and chops off the finger, right?
A Man from the South.
The
Yeah.
Man from the South. Yeah, he does like a variation on that story. It's fairly amusing, but look, it's a trivial, it's a nothing movie, and weirdly, it looks really 90ish. That little short looks 90s and just weird. Anyway, this was the first picture, The Hateful Eight, which I thought was bad. That surprised me. I thought it was made by somebody who is not a capable filmmaker and who did not understand the point of the story. Because so much of the bad filmmaking that comes out of studios today is because the filmmakers do not know what story they are trying to tell. They are answering to too many people, too many committees, too many executives, too many producers, and the script is a muddled mess, and it's just a goo, right? This picture felt like
Yeah.
that. It felt like a goo. I was surprised.
I went back as we're discussing this picture because I'm kind of curious to what the critical response was because I wasn't paying attention to that. I'm looking here. It's like mostly it's positive as well, and like some like A.O. Scott I think saw it as we did, which is this is a mess. But
Oh yeah,
by and large, people seem to A.O. Scott quote
What did A.O. Scott say?
some of the film's ugliness seems dumb and ill-considered, as if Mr. Tarantino's intellectual ambition and his storytelling discipline had failed him at the same time.
Yeah,
Which, yeah, I think so.
yeah,
Um,
I can see that. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his
but by and
numbers.
large, it's positive.
Well, yeah, but it's nowadays. Film critics are just
Well,
they're
that's
just
kind of what
whores. They're whores.
yeah, I feel that's what I bring up. Like, I mean, everybody in our audience, I think, recognized it if they paid attention to Star Wars and the difference between the critic scores and audience scores of The Last Jedi. But I mean, it's common now. It's like you can guarantee that the critic score is useless. And I used to be a guy who loved reading critics, and critics would be the people who actually kind of brought up Quentin Tarantino and always made the case for him. The audience did too, but the critics helped make that happen.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I just have to dismiss every critic now. There's no critic worth reading because
No.
of shit like this.
Yeah, yeah. They lie. They are liars. They are. It's well, it's the way of things. I recently had to speak to a couple of journalists on a particular issue because I was contacted by a couple of journalists to do some background stuff. Okay, and they needed some background assistance and that kind of thing. And these people had written a couple of stories about the subject that they were asking me about, right? And it was clear after 5 minutes that they had no fucking idea what they were talking about. I mean, no fucking clue. And that the people that I was dealing with, who were with a name brand news paper, you'd know it if I mentioned its name. They were just second rate people. I mean, really, just second rate people. And I think that that's the predominant reality, that most of the people in journalists, most of the people who are journalists today are just second rate. They're just not very capable, not very smart. They don't learn stuff. They don't do any kind of background, and they don't pay attention to what they're actually looking at. They just regurgitate the PR. And of course, a lot of these people, these journalists, so-called objective journalists, right? They don't want to piss off the studio because the studio is going to give them freebies and trips to nice locations and shit like that. So they're going to give a positive review to a piece of shit movie, you know? So it's like, fuck them.
And that's what's and again, I know we're talking about Tarantino, but sorry to keep going on this subject, but I think it's pertinent. Like, a lot of the jobs of the critics when I was growing up and before was like, yes, the studio is going to give a lot of big things, but like, yeah, we'll pay attention to the review it for the sake of the audience, but that's not our big focus. The big focus of a lot of the critics I liked to follow at the time, obviously Roger Ebert being one, Siskel as well, and a number of others. Their job was fundamentally, look, the studio's going to produce all sorts of things. My job is to go around, use my critical faculties, dig around and say, okay, this little thing that you're probably never going to see otherwise, here's why it's worth seeing, go see it.
Right.
Nobody does that activity anymore.
No.
And part of the reason I bring it up with Tarantino is because, like, there was a point in time, because like Quentin Tarantino started as like a nothing guy, and he needed critics like that to say, look, we dug him up and said, this guy's worth seeing for this, that, or the other reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not happening. And alternatively, because that's the other thing that those critics have to do, you have to be honest when a filmmaker is deceiving himself.
But you know what's happening though is that no, some critics are doing it. I beg to differ. Some critics are doing it, but they are doing it about these, these for political reasons, for SJW reasons. Because you don't know how many times I've heard. Sorry, they're the police outside my window. They're here to pick me up. But before they arrest me, you know how many times I've heard.
Shut it down.
Yeah, you don't know how many times I've heard like some critic lionize some SJW picture. You know, about trannies or some shit like that. And it's a piece of shit. It's, in terms of quality, it sucks. But it's a political agenda. And you don't know how many times I've seen that of critics. They lionize a picture just because of the political speech that is involved in the picture, and not because it's an actual picture. Because these people don't actually like pictures, I think. They don't like movies. I mean, like, in my own case, right? I am a junkie for movies. When I see a movie that hits me hard, like a good shot of heroin, right? I want to tell people about it. And I feel it. I know it. I know the difference between getting high on a really good movie and, seeing a movie that's just, not very good, But these critics, no, they're not interested in that. They're interested in pushing an agenda and pushing the careers of their friends. I just fucking despise it, because that's not the way criticism used to be before. Roger Ebert didn't care about that. He cared about helping the indie film industry, okay? And Roger Ebert was a driving force in Sundance and trying to get independent filmmakers, young, new talent to emerge on the scene. Yeah, he was big on that, but he was not pushing a political agenda. He was looking for good pictures.
And to be clear, he was a lefty, and he made no bones about it. But to your point, it was not the focus of his critical faculties.
Right.
His critical faculties was to put a movie in front of you and say it. Because there were some right-wing filmmakers that he loved, and he would point out the fact they made great movies.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But and that's, I think, the problem of what you're mentioning, which is to say, pushing of the ideology. What they're lacking is the critical faculty that got shut down.
Yeah, it got shut down. You are no longer able to judge a work of art on its merits, but you must judge it for extraneous factors that have nothing to do with its quality and everything to do with the political ideology of the filmmakers. And bottom line, the worst part is that, see, this doesn't make for successful movies, okay? Well, we're seeing that in fucking Star Wars, right? I mean, all the critics fucking love that piece of SJW bullshit. I mean, shit, even that fucking Admiral cunt, the Laura Dern character, she had the fucking purple hair. I mean, what the fuck is that all about, right? I mean,
Admiral Gender Studies, as we always say.
Admiral Gender Studies, yeah.
And it was unfortunate to see that because I actually like Laura Dern, but that's neither here nor
No,
there. But
after that movie, I never want to see her again. I
I
fucking
know,
hate her guts.
I get what you're saying because it was so bad that you say, why'd you participate,
Yeah,
Laura?
I figured that she is of that kind of ilk, and I don't want to be associated with that. I'm not going to pay good money to see somebody like that. Fuck her.
Tangent point, but I'm glad you brought it up because
What?
David Lynch not too long ago said Trump, could go down as the greatest president
Oh yeah,
because
yeah, and
he retracted it, well, not retracted, but then he had to write a letter
he
soon
walked it
afterwards. He
back.
said,
Yeah.
he walked it back and said, well, these divisive things and everything. Someone said, I wonder who talked to him. And I just realized after you said, oh, it could be Laura Dern because he's actually very close with her and she's in all of his movies. I can easily envision her going to David Lynch and saying, I just heard
It's very
that you wrote
problematic.
that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
fuck that. I mean,
Sorry about the tangent we went on, but I couldn't let the thought go away because I'd forget it if I didn't.
This sort of like proves a point I have to make that Tarantino is very aware of the PC side of the equation. I mean, the politics of who he's pandering to, because like a good exploitation schlock. Okay, he's an exploitation movie maker, highfalutin, but still exploitation.
Right.
And that's the thing where you realize he can never be a true artist because he doesn't have a vision that is independent of his audience. He will only present a vision that his audience wants to see. And that's paradoxically why I think that so many of his pictures are so infused with nostalgia. They ooze it out of its pores, all of his movies. That it's sort of like very comforting, because there are so many of these tiny little elements that are just nostalgic. I was watching Pulp Fiction, for instance, and there was so much stuff like that TV character in one of the things. It's a TV show of a cartoon, and only the mouth moves, and like the face is sort of static, but the mouth moves, right?
Yeah.
I remember those cartoons when I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. It's stuff I grew up with in the 70s. Yeah, it was quite common because it's a cheap way to do animation, right?
Not to mention the big elephant in the room, which is the 50s diner.
Oh, yeah. Everything about it is all nostalgia. And that kind of, that's, again, it's pandering. It's pandering and not having an objective view of reality. Because
the very films themselves, the form of the films themselves are that too. Because it's a throwback to films from the 70s or 60s.
Yeah, but he's taking the best bits of those pictures.
Admittedly, yeah, I give him credit for it. I'm not like just saying like genre in and of itself is bad. No, not any means. But the use of it, especially the way he uses it, he's intentionally doing it for nostalgic reasons.
Yes. Yeah. But I
Well, here's also what's crazy about this though, because you and I recognize that there's a lot of slightness to Tarantino. There's a non-greatness. However, you and I were discussing before this episode. Nevertheless, we're still excited about his next movie.
Yeah, the picture is supposed to be with Leo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. Once Upon a Time in America. Interesting title. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, excuse me.
Yes.
My mistake. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which of course recalls Once Upon a Time in America and Once Upon a Time in the West.
The Sergio Leone movies, the great epic Sergio Leone movies, which I do recommend you watch.
Yeah. But the Once Upon a Time in the West, who did that? I forgot.
Once Upon a Time in the West is Sergio Leone.
Once Upon a
Sergio Leone.
Oh,
in the West.
And Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah.
That was the other Italian director. What's his face?
No. Sergio Leone did both.
He did both?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. No, I believe you. I'm actually looking it up now because I'm kind of curious.
I mentally broke Coach again. How many times can I do it? I'm kidding.
Yeah, you're right.
No, he did. Yeah, he did both.
Okay. Well,
and in addition, sorry, go ahead.
No. The thing is, it looks very exciting. The new picture. He's got Margot Robbie, Al Pacino. I mean, he's got a whole. He can get the cast that he wants, right? That's not the issue. What's interesting about his. What's disappointing? This is the metaphor I would use for him. You see, going with an artist is like taking a trip, okay? And sometimes the trip is exciting and the destination is exciting. Sometimes the trip is boring and the destination is exciting. Think of a lot of the Russian filmmakers. but sometimes the trip is very exciting, but you get nowhere. Like in a oh, what, like Disneyland,
Yeah. Like
like
a ride.
yeah, it's like a ride. It's a ride that goes nowhere. Okay, it's like an amusement park. You get on a ride and you go around and around, but you go nowhere. With somebody like Coppola, with Woody Allen, I'm talking the best of their pictures, right? It's like an exciting ride that lands you at an interesting destination. But with Tarantino, it's an exciting ride that leads you nowhere. I can watch Pulp Fiction again right now. Sure, I'll enjoy it. I'll have a good time. I can recite most of the dialogue of the picture. It's a fun movie. It's a really fun movie. But there's no destination. There's nothing real. There's nothing, no, not real. There are no interesting ideas. It doesn't change me. It doesn't change me as a viewer. It doesn't make me rethink things. We were talking the other day about Rush, right? One of my favorite bands. And one of the reasons I love Rush so much is because before I listened to Rush, I would listen to pop music and stuff like that, and it was all great. But when I listened to Rush, it was sort of like so complex, such complex time signature changes and interesting effects, musical ideas, really sophisticated ideas that demanded you know quite a bit of music theory and understand what the musicians are doing and just all kinds of lovely, intricate stuff, right? And after listening to Rush for a while, I look at pop music and I think it's kind of stupid now. I think it's too simplistic, and I need something meatier in terms of music. And in point of fact, it was because of Rush that I started listening to classical music and more sophisticated music, because pop music just didn't cut it anymore. Okay, I watch a
Right.
movie like The Godfather, for example, Godfather Part Two, really entertaining picture and yet very profound. And it makes me think, and it changes my way that I look at a picture. I look at it in a much more sophisticated way. Tarantino's movies are for people who have not watched many movies, or if they have watched a lot of movies, have not thought about them very much. It's all ride, but no destination, like an amusement park.
You know, I completely agree. I mean, it's Quentin Tarantino is not forcing me to reconsider anything. I think I think more or less I think what you said, and I think what I agree with. I appreciate technique in him. In a way, he's a lot like Steven Spielberg to
Yeah,
me. I
yeah,
appreciate, there's a lot of good effort in there. It's a fun ride. I enjoy it. Give credit where credit is due on that front. But if you were to ask me, it's like, is this a film which I take home with me and I stew on it and contemplate it? No. Do I remember lines of dialogue or shots? Absolutely, that's the case. Do they force me to, I'll put it this way. If I were to go off and do something creative, or I'm thinking creatively, is the use of Quentin Tarantino as a lesson builder or as a teacher going to help me in any way, or am I going to think about him as a way of getting what I need done, and it's going to help me produce something better? No, it really isn't.
yeah, yeah. You know, I'm thinking of another Tarantino picture, Natural Born Killers, right? Um, which is a fundamentally brilliant idea. That's Tarantino's idea. You know, two killers, Bonnie and Clyde, and the Australian camera guy who's chasing them. It's a great picture, great concept, great everything. Well, what's interesting is that, see, Natural Born Killers, as Oliver Stone made it, which I think is morally despicable and intellectually dishonest. It's a much better picture because it makes me think and it makes me change how I look at movies. Because I recognize that NBK, Natural Born Killers, is a dishonest movie. It's an incredibly dishonest movie. Because Oliver Stone made sure to eliminate everything that would center you and ground you on a moral level. But precisely because of that, precisely because of my realization of that, I now look at movies in a different way. I recognize that Natural Born Killers is a great movie, even if it's a despicable movie. But it is a great movie in a way that nothing that Tarantino has done as a director can compare.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. No. Yeah. No, I see it.
Yeah.
I absolutely see it, and it's strange because it's almost as if it's a non. How should I put this? It's certainly a product of what I'm seeing on screen, but I can't point to a specific element on screen that says that's why. You know what I mean? It's almost like metatextual. Maybe I'm getting a little
It's
too
no,
out of
he
my.
just doesn't have any thoughts in his head, man. That's as
Yeah.
simple as that. He's just not thinking of anything other than the next shock, the next scene that will shock you. What's interesting about Tarantino, though, is that unlike somebody like Michael Bay, he takes his sweet time with his scenes. I mean, sometimes he'll just allow a shot to linger and take its sweet time. I mean, he's it's exploitation, yes, and trying to get the crowd to like be like wowed by a scene, but he doesn't believe that fast cutting is the way to go to get that, and I respect that. I mean, that is a
Yeah.
quality that he does have. I mean, it's not that he does like these long jerk off takes, like the Scorsese Copacabana scene. It's that he takes his time. He's not in a rush, and he recognizes too that a lot of times the power of a movie is precisely the contrast, the calm, slow, collected scene, contrasted with the fast, breakneck speed scene. And a lot of times you don't have to see stuff. I mean, like for instance, in Jackie Brown, there's that great scene where Robert De Niro is being irritated by Bridget Fonda, who's just poking him
Right.
and just making fun of him, and he turns around
That's
and
my
kills her. Yeah,
that's my favorite sequence in the whole movie, by the way.
yeah, it's a great sequence, and the most spectacular part is that you don't see her. It's all from his point of view. For him, he just squashed a bug. And it was so brilliant that because you don't see her, there's no insert shot of her body splayed out on the floor, bleeding out, and dead. No, 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 none of that. He treats it directorially in a way that is so maniacally focused on the character's perception of that reality. Like he'd squashed a bug. It was just so brilliant, and you got to give kudos. Tarantino is like Shyamalan. He's a better director than writer.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, and something to keep in mind here, part of the reason we're all willing to talk about Quentin Tarantino at this level is that he does have talent. It's, and that's why I think we allow ourselves, or certainly I allow myself, to be very critical. Is if he were just a pure hack, there would be nothing to talk
Oh
about.
yeah, we
You
wouldn't
know what
even
I
have
mean?
this episode. Yeah,
Exactly. The fact that he has the talent, but
we're not going to do
either
an episode on Michael Bay, for instance, because he's just a hack.
exactly. We may reference Michael Bay, but that's about it.
Yeah,
Yeah. The fact that Quentin Tarantino has the talent, but makes creative decisions that we think, what the fuck is that? Or that's, it's a mistake, and here's why. That's why it's compelling. But you have to be good enough in order to, be worthy of saying that's a mistake. If you're just a hack, you don't make mistakes. You just are a hack.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. But I guess it's very frustrating because he really is very knowledgeable about pictures. He really is just a very good director. But there's no intellectual curiosity, and there's no humanistic curiosity. He doesn't care about how people work, and that's something that I find very frustrating. Because, like, okay, we were talking about Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone gives a shit about how people work, what
Yes.
gears are turning in their heads to make them behave a certain way. Tarantino does not care, and that I find just really disturbing, because it's this chocolate that just this chocolate covered goodness, but in the center there's nothing. I mean that's what I get out of his
Yeah.
pictures.
Well, what's funny about that, remember this was a story not too long ago. I want to get your take on it, especially keeping in mind that there's a fundamental lack of, forgive the expression, humanism
Mm-hmm.
in Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
What was your take on when, that news broke not too long ago? He says, I want to make an R-rated Star Trek movie.
Well, that would be interesting. God knows
That's
where it
the
would
thing.
go.
I want to see it because I want to see how far off the fucking rails it would go. But given what you said, like, he fundamentally doesn't care how people think or operate or behave.
Do you agree with that assessment?
I do, especially in later films. I think you could give credit that, like, in Jackie Brown and parts of
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction, it was there. I could see it. And maybe to your point, he decided to go away from it. But needless to say, in the films he's making now, it's not really there.
No.
And that would be a fundamental, for all of us who say, like, people really don't get Star Trek now, that would be a fundamental continuation of that. But it would be a brilliant output visually, or moment wise to sequence wise to see what a Quentin Tarantino R-rated, like I said, off the fucking rails Star Trek movie would be, but it would not be anywhere near what you think of as the core meaning of Star Trek. It'd be like a jerk off session in the wrapping of of a Star Trek tissue.
No, it would be the ultimate. I mean, see, if you told me that Star Wars is going to be shot in cardboard sets a la 1968, or it's going to be shot in state of the art, hyper futuristic sets, neither would surprise me. I mean, I could see it going in any direction whatsoever.
I could easily, well, Quentin, I think, really likes Wrath of Khan, so I have a feeling he would try to reproduce it some way.
Oh, God, but I could, like that hasn't been done already? Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried to make Wrath of Khan 20 different times in Star Trek.
Yeah.
But as soon as you said it, I'm like, if Quentin Tarantino went around and said, here's the 60 sets again, I'm going to film them like that with the fucking lighting and everything, I would have said, it's so insane, I have to see that.
Yeah.
But that's the weird thing. It's like when we're talking about this, think about the things we're excited about when we talk about it. The technical side of things, the minutia detail of nostalgia that he probably would bring to it. Not anything about would he reproduce, the Gene Roddenberry-esque, like, what is the optimistic view of humanity? So fucking view of humanity in the show that would happen. There would be nothing of that.
Yeah. No, I'm. Yeah, I mean, Gene Roddenberry would be like turning in his grave to have what's his face be the director of a Star Trek movie. I mean,
he would be spinning in his steel drum that's orbiting the planet.
Yeah, wherever that is. But it's how can I put this? Tarantino is ultimately a huge disappointment as a filmmaker. Because I think especially after Jackie Brown, I remember watching Jackie Brown, I thought, man, this is really an exceptional movie. This is right up there. I mean, it can stand toe-to-toe with the films of great filmmakers. And then he did Kill Bill, and I was just, oh, man. And he just continued to go off the rails. I think that it was great promise that was thrown away. I think also he has this weird obsession with his own talent. He keeps talking about my talent and the limits of my talent and shit like that.
Yeah.
But that's a fundamentally, not narcissistic, it's a fundamentally arrogant approach to filmmaking, to think that your talent is so great. The talent is just in the service of something, the service of a point of view. In and of itself, it's trivial. It's not important. It's like having a really fancy car. Right? Like a really expensive, like a really fast car. The point of the car is to win the race. It's not an end in itself. When he says that he wants to explore the limits of his talent, it's like saying that I'm going to take this really fast car and test drive it to see how fast it can go, not I'm going to take this car to win a race.
Right.
The distinction between the two, and I think that's
well, to that point, then that's the other thing. You'd have to admit that, okay, all of these are exercises and experimentation, which is to say, they don't really have a consideration of what you think as the audience, or they don't have a consideration as to the maybe a fundamental nature of film. It's more like, this particular feature, I'm testing this.
Yeah.
This particular capability, I'm testing that.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, it can be monomaniacal and indifferent to other fundamental goals that you think would be relatively important.
And the funny thing is that Hateful Eight, his talent left him, because I did not see any talent in that picture. I mean, really, I'm not being hyperbolic. I honestly thought that, first of all, they could have easily shot it in 35 mil. I don't quite understand the point of doing it all in 70 and making a big to-do about it, because, there was nothing special about how they shot it. The scenes, there were interior scenes, and they didn't work, and there was no spectacle. Because I was honestly expecting like a spectacle, like it was going to be like a big... Because that's the whole point of using a 70 mil camera, to capture big panoramic sweeping shit. And the shit that we saw was just interiors, and not interesting interiors at that, with a stupid.
And the problem is, when you have that extra wide screen 70 millimeter and you try to play those interior scenes, you just have what's the word I'm looking for? It's disorienting, because you have this oblong shape that doesn't really work well for characters in a small room trying to convey claustrophobia or near each other, what have you. You just have this awkward space.
Yeah.
Right. So if anything, it's a disservice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for all of his bullshit talk about his talent and I got to reach the limits of my talent and shit like that, he always spews out, which I find just, ugh, I find it distasteful. He didn't have any talent. He didn't show any talent. That's surprising because Robert Richardson is an exceptionally good cinematographer. What the fuck happened? Both of them failed. They didn't know what to do with 70 millimeter. Jesus.
I have a feeling it's like they got that idea in their head and they just felt like, well, we have to go with it to a certain extent. I wouldn't be surprised if halfway through
inertia.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if halfway through filming they realized, oh fuck, it's not working. But they said, well, we probably made a big brouhaha over doing it this way, so well, we got to keep pushing it. I could believe that, which is why. But all of this is, like you said, the worry that the talent is gone. This emphasizes why the next film, to me, is very critical to watch. In addition to just it being like, okay, that's an interesting story I want to see. I'm now curious to see, well, to what extent is Hateful Eight an anomaly or a sign of things to come?
Well, he said that he was only going to do 10 pictures, and he's done 8 so far, by his count, right? Okay, fine.
Right.
So this is going to be number 9, right? This is the penultimate picture. And here's the other thing. You never say something as stupid as that, because it's not that it was a tossed off comment that he said once. No, he's repeated this like mantra like a bunch of times. He's sort of like locked into this whole thing of like he's only going to do 10 movies. Okay, fine, motherfucker. This is your penultimate picture. Okay? You better be fucking good, because you got this one and one more, and that's that. And if the next one is going to be Star Trek, it's going to be fucking bizarre to exit on that particular note. And you're going to better fucking exit, or else we're going to, laugh at your fucking face, I don't know. I think that it's always foolish for people to put themselves in a box like that of saying, I'm only going to do this. And if, it's like when those people say, oh, I'm quitting, and then, everybody's like, okay, quit. And they're like, oh, it's like, I don't know. How can I put it? I find it just so frustrating because I thought that he could be great and he wasn't. And I was growing up and I was excited about Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, but I was excited not because I thought that those pictures were that great. I thought they were both fantastic pictures at the time. Retrospectively, it was sort of like an arc, like a distribution arc. It started like, wow, that's amazing. And then I saw it a few more times, and man, this is really amazing. And then it started like to decay, and then I'm like, it's not that great. And now it's sort of like, not that big of a deal. It seemed flashier at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, my thinking is he was so disappointing because I've said this before. Jackie Brown, it pointed in the direction that could have been amazing, and he just decided to go the grindhouse route, the exploitation route, the highfalutin, crowd pleaser route, and not the route of an artist. I find it disappointing.
But I think that's the best way to summarize it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's the episode right there. I mean, I feel very similar. It's to me, it isn't even about like potentiality that got wasted per se, as much as I realized in myself, growing up, like it's very easy to convince yourself that because everybody else is saying something is great, that it objectively is.
Yeah.
And I felt like in retrospect, looking through Quentin Tarantino, I felt like I was force feeding myself the narrative that my fellow film snobs or film buffs were saying for a long time, which is this is the most substantial filmmaker around in America and blah 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 blah. And I realized, no, we're really deceiving ourselves as to what's really going on here.
Yeah. Oh well. Next.
Next. So, like, to wrap up, though, I'm going to do something interesting.
Shoot.
Hopefully, which is to say, rather than say, like, go watch this Quentin Tarantino movie versus that one, I'll do something that I said critics aren't doing now, which they used to do, which is try to find movies you may not have encountered, a la like how Quentin Tarantino was found, and kind of bring it to your attention. I'll do this one. It's coming out later this year, and it's from a filmmaker who has only made one other film, and I like it, but this new one's coming out, could potentially be wild. It's very visually interesting, starring Nicolas Cage of all people. Could be very weird. It's called like I gotta look at like Mandy or something like that. It's from the director who did Beyond the Black Rainbow, which is sort of the movie that Stranger Things kind of sold all of its mojo from. And this new film, like I said, let me just look up to make sure I'm
Oh
telling.
yeah, Mandy. That's the name of the movie. Yeah.
It is Mandy. Yeah,
And
Mandy.
it's a chainsaw murder movie.
There's a chainsaw sword fight, so which is kind of a ripoff from Phantasm, but that's neither here nor there. But it's very much that kind of take the weirdest 80s movies you could ever conceive of and just amp it up, and have something visually just kind of insane. I don't know how great this film's going to be, but Beyond the Black Rainbow, I really enjoyed it as a sort of minimalist visual feast.
Mm-hmm.
Give this, keep this film on your radar. It could potentially be interesting. It could be like a wild kind of experimental kind of thing. I want to do what other critics should be doing but aren't doing, and try to give you guys like something to look forward to, as opposed to me continually bashing guys who I really prefer you not see all the time.
Okay, so with that said, we're going to call it a podcast. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast. We've been discussing Quentin Tarantino. Dr. Benway, why don't you take us out?
Well, don't repeat Quentin Tarantino's dialogue in your life. If I have to, hear the Samuel L. Jackson speech one more time, I'm gonna start pulling out a gun and say what again, motherfucker? Say that speech. I just did what I said I shouldn't do, but needless to say.
Okay, so thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.